We're at Roman numeral 1, letter H, H-I, okay? So we talked about how this is actually good for this, we're celebrating the holiday of Shavuot just this weekend. Shavuot begins Saturday night, it's observed Sunday, and then Sunday night through Monday, 2-day holiday here in the diaspora. Shavuot is a holiday that in the Torah has no date. It's just the 50th day after Pesach. We have a fixed calendar now, so it's always on the 6th of Sivan. It just so happens that this holiday of Shavuot coincides with this really momentous event in Jewish history when the Jewish people reached Sinai and were given the Torah. Okay, so it's sort of very apropos to what we're studying right now. So at Sinai we got the written Torah, which we looked at a few weeks ago, which is just letters on parchment. No, that's the form we have it now, just letters without any punctuation, without any, some paragraph breaks, but no periods even, no vocalization, and all of the added meaning is all oral tradition, right? We have the written Torah is just what the letters are, the oral tradition is what they sound like when they're read aloud, and the oral tradition is also what the words mean, what their significance is, what they, how we interpret the written Torah, and that also comes from Sinai. Some of that, maybe, or definitely, was actually given to Moshe directly by God at Sinai, like, this is what this verse means, or this is how this verse sounds when you read it out loud, this is what this word is. All right, Hebrew, the same letters can be read in multiple different ways depending on how you would vocalize it. And so how that word is read and what that meaning is therefore, that's also part of the oral tradition that Moshe received. But also Moshe was told by God, and you should interpret as well. And so throughout the generations, culminating in the Talmudic period that we talked about last week, rabbis, scholars were interpreting biblical verses and deriving legal meaning from those biblical verses. That's true. And if you study the Talmud, that's what you'll see. You'll see discussions of law, elements of every minute detail and the detail of the details of Jewish law, trying to connect it back to the verses in the Torah. Where does this come from? How do we know this? What does this verse mean? And I told you, I think, the metaphor of you have a whole bunch of shirts and you have a bunch of hangers. Is that? Yes, maybe? Okay, you want to make sure that every shirt has a hanger and every hanger has a shirt and no shirt is left without a hanger and no hanger has 2 shirts. Okay, that's not my closet. Not like I have like 7 shirts on one hanger. That's my closet. But if you imagine a lot of the Talmudic discussion about midrash, about halachic legal midrash, is making sure, okay, here's this detail and here's this verse. Let's pin the legal law, the detail of the law on this biblical verse. But then if this verse is teaching that law, if I'm using this hanger for that shirt, then I need a different shirt, different hanger for that other shirt. And if this hanger's not holding this shirt, then where's this shirt? What's being hung on, right? And then that's a lot of those debates is all about the musical chairs of just putting shirts on hangers and making sure that everyth's accounted for. That's a lot of what the Talmud does. We'll have a chance maybe sometime to study Talmud together, and you'll see how that plays out. Okay, just review. In the year 200, around the year 200, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right, takes all this oral Torah, edits it down, and organizes it in something called the Mishnah. We talked about that already. Okay, once the Mishnah is published as this codified collection of the oral Torah, it then gets expanded, interpreted, debated, and that several centuries later results in the Talmud. And then we talked about how Talmud was taught primarily in academies in Babylonia, in what today is Iraq, and was therefore, and the heads of the Talmudic academies taught Torah and provided religious guidance to Jews all over the world, mostly in the Mediterranean basin. That's where Jews mostly lived. And it was very convenient that they were right at the heart of this Islamic empire, which was based in Baghdad and Damascus, and then they had trade routes and emissaries going all to Spain and all across North Africa and everywhere where Jews lived. And that's how these Talmudic academies exerted their authority and taught Torah. And then, at some point in time, around the year 1000, you have the rise of independent Torah scholarship in the West, in Fez, in Tunisia, in Spain, and elsewhere, where rabbis thought, oh, we can actually interpret Torah ourselves, we can teach Torah ourselves, we don't need to send all our questions back to Babylonia. And that's the rise of the Rishonim. Okay, the Rishonim, that's letter H, okay, we got there last time. That is The Rishonim literally means the first ones, the early ones. They didn't know of themselves as the early ones. They didn't realize, right? Because just like in the Middle Ages, they didn't know they were living in the Middle Ages, right? They presumably, right? That was not something they hadn't realized yet. And the Rishonim, let's say from the year 1000 to the when you end the period, it's a little confusing. But so what they did was the Rishonim, they wrote commentaries in the Talmud. They also wrote codes of Jewish law. I think it's where we ended last week. Okay, so everything I said before is okay. The first code of Jewish law, took the Rif last week. The Rif took the Talmud and he took out all the debates and he left in just the bottom line law. Okay, that's okay. The Rambam, Maimonides, wrote a magnum opus, a phenomenal code of Jewish law. He called it Mishneh Torah, which means the recapitulation of the Torah. He had very high expectations for this book. His religious philosophy prioritizes the life of the mind and philosophical contemplation. He believes that if the mind achieves and contemplates truth while someone is alive, then that part of your soul cleaves to God in some way because you're contemplating the divine and contemplating truth and thinking about philosophy, and in that way, your soul lives forever. So he felt that this eternal life of the soul is dependent on intellectual attainment. Doesn't matter how nice you are, doesn't matter how much charity you give, it's all about, do you understand truth? Which meant, and the purpose of all the mitzvot of the Torah were either to help us learn the truth or to keep us away from falsehood. Like we have certain mitzvot in the Torah, certain commandments in the Torah to separate us from the way the idolaters practiced or believe, or to create an ordered, peaceful, just society so that everyone has the time and the tranquility to study philosophy and contemplate truth. And therefore, with that philosophical background, and he explains this in his other magnum opus, The Guide for the Perplexed, and that's his philosophical masterpiece. But because he wanted everyone to be spending their time in this philosophical exploration, sort of the Talmud and the Talmudic debates can get in the way. So he wanted to provide a clear code of Jewish law that would contain all the information you need to be a Jew in this one book. And he wrote a 14-volume work called Mishneh Torah, organized in a beautiful conceptual way. He starts with a book called The Foundations of the Torah. You know there's one God, and so that God is no body, and God isn't physical, and he can't be divided, and God knows everything, and then just progress all the way to the yearnings for the rebuilt Jerusalem and the days of the Messianic age at the very end. And everything's organized in a beautiful, it's both a law code and a work of art. It's an incredible, incredible masterpiece. I would recommend, it exists in English translation. He wrote it actually, all of his writings he wrote in Arabic except for the Mishneh Torah, which he wrote in perfect rabbinic Hebrew. It's a beautiful, beautiful, clear rabbinic Hebrew. So even if your Hebrew is not excellent, and you want to learn classical Hebrew, you can't go back like a Mishneh Torah and get a dictionary if you need that help. But it's beautiful, beautiful Hebrew, and it exists in English translation as well, okay, for free. There's a nice translation of the whole thing into English. Chabad bought the rights and they put it up on their website. So if you go to chabad.org and you go to library and you go to classics and you go to Rambam, you go to the English Rambam, you can find the whole thing there in English if you want. So Rambam, and I think I've been using his Rambam, okay, that's his Jewish name, okay, stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, I should have spelled that out. He's known in Greek as Maimonides, okay, so you heard Maimonides, in Hebrew he's called the Rambam, or Rambam, his full name, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. Rambam fails in this goal of having the Mishneh Torah replace all of the Talmudic scholarship and everything that came before it. Instead, it just joined the Jewish bookshelf, and it became itself a source for further Talmudic scholarship. Because, Rambam says you practice this law in X, Y, and Z way. How did he think that? How did he read the Talmud to end up with this conclusion? And so the commentary on the Rambam, there's a whole commentary literature on the Rambam, which is all focused on how did Rambam read the Talmud such that he comes up with this novel interpretation of Jewish law. Or it seems he contradicts himself, and he's such a careful writer. Every word seems to be chosen with such precision So he's contradicting himself. Something must be happening under the surface. What's going on here? So that's Rambam scholarship, and so it just joined the Jewish bookshelf as another code, and that's another, again, another piece of scholarship. The next, and throughout this period of time, the medieval period, Rambam is in the 1200s, and you also have scholars, Rishonim, again, this early stage, these earlier medieval scholars. They're also writing commentaries on the Talmud, outright commentaries. They're also writing commentaries on the Torah. So I'll show you in a minute what that can look like. Let me get a better position. Hold on. So this is a classic page of Talmud. It did not look like this in the early Middle Ages. Why not? Commentary goes back. Why not? What? Did you say something?
Just read the center.
Because what?
Read the center box.
Read the center box. Why?
Because that's the Talmud.
Yes, but why didn't it look like this in the Middle Ages?
I don't know.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Because the printing press wasn't invented, okay? Someone said that? Okay. Printing press was invented in 1450 something. Right? Okay. Jews love the printing press. We adapted that technology very, very quickly. And the Talmud was one of the first books printed in Hebrew. We actually have some of those first edition printed Talmuds, and they look kind of like this. We adopted this format. In the middle is the Talmud itself. The Mishnah and the Talmud itself are in the middle. On the inside margin is the commentary of Rashi. Okay, Rashi was born in 1040, died 1105, lived most of his life in Troyes in France. You can visit, I think Troyes is like a statue of Rashi there. He's the most famous person ever to live in Troyes. The only famous person ever to live in Troyes except for his family. Rashi's commentary goes word by word, line by line in the Talmud. He tells you what it means. The Talmud assumes you know the entire Talmud. So if you don't, it can be a little bit confusing. And so Rashi tells us, well, here's what this conversation is assuming you know. Here's what this word means. He'll translate words that you don't know necessarily. And once Rashi's commentary spread to a Jewish community, it became the dominant way to study Talmud. Until you have Rashi, you need someone to, like a tutor, someone to teach you. It's impossible to just jump in without. With Rashi, you can really, make a go of it on your own. And he just, eventually, within however long it took, but whenever he reached, he spread to every Jewish community in the world and became the main way Talmud was studied. Once Rashi then tells you what the text means, now you can understand what doesn't make sense about it. Okay, and that was the outer margins, which is the generation of Rashi's grandchildren, who were known collectively as the Tosafot, the additional comments. And these are framed as notes on Rashi, but what they introduce into Talmudic scholarship is dialectic. Dialectic is, it says one thing here, it says something else there. Let's read these two things in light of one another and see what creative new insight emerges from that combination. Rashi just tells you, here's what the word means in the context of this page. Tosafot are global, right? They read all of the Talmud as one, as one thing, one book to be sort of keep in mind. And so, if this passage here is in some tension with some other tractate, some other volume, someplace else, Tosafot will note that. So it says this here, it says that there. Let's figure that out. And Tosafot were literally Rashi's grandsons, and the generation of Rashi's grandsons, and so they're on the Talmudic page as well. So this is also the period of the Rishonim. This is the same time as Maimonides. And actually, the Tosafot are the same time as Maimonides. Maimonides did not know about the Tosafot. They were in northern France and Germany. Maimonides, Rambam was writing Mishnah Torah in Egypt. Did not know about the Tosafot, but they kind of undermine his attempt to take Jewish law and kind of write it and carve it in this pristine, eloquent, fully organized, perfect form for all time. And the Tosafot are blowing up that conception of Jewish law because they're saying, hey, let's use dialectical reasoning and see how everything makes so much less sense than we thought, and let's figure out what new things we can discover. by reading these texts and studying with new insight in these new ways. Interesting, at the same time that Tosafot were doing this in Talmudic scholarship, you had non-Jewish scholars doing this in philosophy and canon law at the same time, and around the same place. Nobody has been able to find any paths of influence one way or the other, but it seems that people were thinking this way in the same part of the world around the same time. The famous book of, I guess, Christian philosophy called, it's called Yes and No, Sic et Non, right, in Latin, which is from around that time, and that's sort of how it presents, dialectic says that maybe this, maybe that, and what's the truth? And that's sort of what Tosafot are doing. Next big jump in the history of codification comes with, let's say a few centuries later. You have a scholar, because what else is happening in the middle of the 1200s, anti-Semitism gets really, really bad in Europe. Things were not great before. 1096 is the First Crusade, and you have Jewish communities this time of year, precisely this time of year, on Shavuot even, you have Jewish communities massacred in the Rhineland as the crusading armies are marching to conquer the Holy Land from the Muslims. They murdered every Jewish community they can find along the way, and the Jewish communities in Speyer, Magenza, and Vermaisa are annihilated. That was a big turning point. But the Jewish communities recovered even in the Rhineland, despite the trauma of those massacres. I had a professor who said the First Crusades were the last time the Jews of Europe were surprised. So it wasn't necessarily the big turning point that some scholars think, at least so I was taught. Things get really, really bad in the middle of the 1200s when anti-Semitism becomes based on fantasy. Until that point, anti-Semitism was based on things that the Jews acknowledged as true. The Christians would say, you rejected and killed Jesus, and the Jews would say, yes, we did, but that was the good thing. They sort of agreed on all the terms, they just disagreed on the significance. Okay? Starting in the middle of the 13th century, anti-Semitism is blood libel and well poisoning and host desecration, all sorts of really real fantasies, devil worship, and all sorts of really crazy things. There isn't a clear explanation of why that turn towards the kind of diabolical Jew hatred sort of spreads, but the conditions for Jews worsen in the 13th century, and you have expulsions from England in I think the 1190s, you have expulsions from France in the maybe 1240s, I should have looked at these dates before, and you have massacres in Germany in 1298, the Rheinfleisch massacres, 1298, and many, many significant scholars, as well as many ordinary people, are killed at that point. At that time, there's a scholar, Haram of Rothenburg, tries to flee he sends his students actually, he tries to flee to Spain. He had to leave Germany. Things are better in Spain at that time. Spain is half Christian, half Muslim. At that point, it was still better in both parts of Spain for Jews. He's actually captured while he's attempting to flee, and he's taken prisoner by the emperor, and he refuses to be ransomed because he knows the community collects money to ransom him, but he knows that if he accepts the ransom money, then every Jewish leader will be at risk of being kidnapped and held for ransom. So he refuses to be freed, and he stays in prison for several years, I think 6 years, and he dies in prison, and his body stays in prison for some time afterward until eventually the community pays the money and gets his body out and they bury him. His students manage to escape, and a very important one, his name is called Rabbi Asher Bar Yechiel, who known as the Rush. He has a commentary on the Talmud, which is very good and still studied and influential. He moves to Spain, becomes a rabbi, I think in Toledo or maybe someplace else. And his son, who grew up in Germany but lived a significant amount of time in Spain, writes a code of Jewish law called the Tur, or the Arba'at Turim, the 4 pillars. And again, because he learned Torah in his youth in Germany, but he worked as a rabbi in Spain, he kind of knows about these 2 great Jewish communities and their different traditions and their different ways of practicing. He sort of knows about both of them. he writes a code of Jewish law, which called the Four Pillars, and the Four Pillars are the four areas of practical observing. He's not going to, unlike Maimonides, unlike the Rabbi, whose code of Jewish law includes how to perform the sacrifices in the rebuilt temple, the Torah says, let me just give like a practical guide for things we actually do today, here and now, in Spain. I'm not going to have agricultural laws that only pertain to the land of Israel. I'm not going to include laws that only pertain to the Messianic age when the temple's rebuilt. I'll just deal with practical life for the here and now. So the four pillars are Orach Chaim, which is the laws of daily life, from waking, and he organizes it not conceptually. It's not like, again, not like Rambam, not like Maimonides, where the first section is, the very first line, what Rambam is, the pillar of all knowledge and faith is to know there's a God, and there's one God. Whereas the Torah says, no, the beginning is you wake up in the morning. And what do you say? How do you wake up in the morning? And he goes through the course of the day, and then he goes through the course of the calendar, Shabbat, holidays, and the cycle of the year. So it's liturgy, prayer, how you conduct oneself, blessings before and after food, what you'll encounter in shul, all the laws that pertain to the shul, and tefillah, prayer, as well as all the laws of the holidays, how to observe Shabbat, how to observe Pesach, how to observe Purim, how to light Hanukkah candles, just the calendar, the daily calendar and the yearly calendar. That's Orach Chaim. Part 2 is Even Ezer, marriage, divorce, and all the more complicated variations thereof. Okay? Sort of the personal status issues. Hello. Hi. We're going to finish up in a few minutes. Time for mincha. You're welcome to join us, or you can walk through Hasi too. Our afternoon prayers begin at 7:50, so people are beginning to gather. You're welcome and encouraged to stay if you wish for mincha. So that's evidence. Third is, I'm getting the order wrong, but okay. Third is your idea, which is ritual law, kosher, non-kosher, right? What happens if, and all the accidents that, if a little bit of meat gets in your dairy, dairy gets in your meat, so non-kosher food falls into your kosher food, and also law, the restrictions, Jewish sexual regulations, and it's also in your idea. So all ritual law is there, and then the final one is kosher mishpat, which is civil law. About we had a little kosher mishpat situation in our apartment. Our upstairs neighbors were watering a plant, a little planter, and it fell through the roof of our screened-in porch. So that's a little kosher mishpat, right? It's a little civil damages, like things with neighbors, okay, how they interact. Okay, so you find it's a condo expense, okay, it's a common. So a very practical way of ordering Jewish law. Each of these four sections are divided into simanim, into chapters, and chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 400, for each of those four sections. This work, it's a very, he also cites some sources, he cites multiple opinions, it's not too long, it's not too short, very, very popular book, a very helpful book, and it becomes the Dewey Decimal System for Jewish law. Because subsequent books of Jewish law are based on this division of Jewish law to these four sections. And those, so if 308, Orach Chaim, the laws of daily life, number 308 is about, pertains to heating and cooking, or not heating and cooking food on Shabbat in the Torah, and so too in subsequent codes of Jewish law. Orach Chaim 308 is cooking and heating food on Shabbat, and 318, not 308, for example. And so it becomes, so it's very influential not only in its own right as a book, but also it's very influential as sort of, he establishes a certain division of Jewish law as a subject matter. Now, skipping ahead to the 16th century, and let's just talk about what happens in Jewish history between then. 1492, Jews are expelled from Spain. I already mentioned you have the massacres in 1298 in Germany. The Maharan Rothenburg tries to flee, he dies. That's 1304, 1305, I think he dies. 14th century, you have the Black Plague and lots of expulsions from, and by the end, by 1492, when the Jews are expelled from Spain, there are really much fewer Jews living in France and Germany. They've been expelled and massacred and Black Death, and most of them have gone east to Poland. Many of them have gone east to Poland. And you no longer have Jews in Spain. They've been expelled, so they've gone to to Holland, they've gone to North Africa and Greece and Italy and Turkey and also Syria even, and a few of them come to the Americas. And so when the curtain rises in the 16th century, Jews are not living France, Germany, Spain relatively close together. They're kind of spread out much farther apart. In the 16th century, two rabbis have the same idea. They said, let's write a scholarly commentary on the Torah, the four pillars, the book that I just mentioned, written by Yaakov, the son of the Rush, okay, who went from Germany to Spain. So two rabbis in the 16th century, so some years later, let's write a scholarly commentary. I'll go section by section the Torah, and I'll bring all his sources from the Talmud, from the Rishonim, and I'll analyze them, and then I'll give some bottom line, interpretations of my own. And they both have the same idea, and one of them is in Poland, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, and the other is in the Galilee, in Sfat, in Israel. He was in exile from Spain, Rabbi Joseph Caro. And Yosef Caro publishes first, and he calls his commentary the Beit Yosef, the house of Yosef, after his name was Yosef. It's an encyclopedic commentary on the Torah. And every edition of the Torah is printed with the Beit Yosef, which is probably the more important book. It's like the more popular, more important work at this point. Torah, less important, Beit Yosef, extremely important. And Rav Moshe Isserlis in Poland, he was beaten to the punch. He realized he had lost, and so instead he wrote a much shorter encyclopedic scholarly commentary, which just fills in all the Ashkenazi material that the Torah didn't include because he was living in Spain, and that Rav Yosef Caro, who came from Spain, didn't include because he didn't necessarily know about. And so these are the Ashkenazi scholars that were left out, and he fills them in. We have a few minutes. And then those two individuals have another idea, also around the same time. And that idea is, let me take, now that I've done all this work and know Jewish law so well, let me take what I've done and edit it and condense it into a shorter, like digest, like a easy pocket guide to Jewish law. And once again, Rav Yosef Caro publishes first, and he titles his distillation of his magnum opus, like the Beit Yosef, the encyclopedic, commentary on the Torah. That's his great work of scholarship. He calls his like Reader's Digest version, his simple guide, the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. Because everything, I'm just going to give you bottom line, what to do, very simple, very brief. You can, if you read us a few sections a day, like do the whole thing every 30 days, constant review, you know what to do, very easy. And Moshe Isserlis in Krakow, once again, he realized he had lost out. He'd been beaten to the punch, and so he writes a tiny little commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, where he gives the Ashkenazi perspective. So Shulchan Aruch will say what it says, and they'll say, here our custom is to do X, Y, and Z a little bit differently. But the two of them together, now you have a book that can be a very authoritative, helpful, reliable guide to Jewish law for Jews from the Spanish Sephardic tradition, as well as Jews from the Northern European Ashkenazi tradition. And so this book really unites, for a time, kind of world Jewry. It's an authoritative book for everyone, an important book for everyone. And here, we now end the period of the Rishonim, okay, because from this point on, nobody, I won't say nobody because I don't want to be like two, but I'm going to say nobody, even though probably it's not true, like nobody, but I'm going to say it anyway just to be simple. Nobody again writes a commentary on the Talmud for the purpose of figuring out Jewish law. That's what the Rishonim did. Okay? The Tosafot will have an insight into what the Talmud really means, and based on their insight, Jewish practice, they would guide Jewish practice. And the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef does this as well, because he's analyzing the Talmudic passages, and he's analyzing the Rishonim, and he's using that's all grist for the mill as he writes the Shulchan Aruch, his guidebook for Jewish law. Really, at that point, people stop writing commentaries on the Talmud and start writing commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, or commentaries on the Rishonim. Even the Shulchan Aruch, the Beit Yosef, a lot of it is a commentary on the Rishonim. he felt there were people a generation, a century, 2 centuries before him, that it was worthwhile commenting on them and trying to understand them, right? That they themselves were a worthy subject of scholarship. But certainly the Shulchan Aruch is a turning point. Maybe you want to say the milestone was a little bit earlier. Maybe it was the expulsion from Spain and the kind of the disruption of the 15th century, 14th century. Things were pretty bad in the 14th century too. And when Jewish scholarship emerges from that turmoil, people no longer felt confident that they could open up a Talmud and based on my you're reading it, no one has ever understood the Talmud this way before, but I think Jewish law should be X. I will say one caveat: in modern times, you have questions of Jewish medical ethics and medical halacha where there's absolutely no precedent, right, in classical halachic literature for surrogacy and for various types of assisted reproductive technology and for certain end-of-life dilemmas. Very few clear precedent or no precedent, and what scholars have had to do is to look back to the Talmud, go back to early sources, and say, oh, actually, this could be really teaching us some principle that can help us in some dilemma of assisted reproductive technology or whatever it might be. So there is some of that in modern times because we've had no choice really but to do that. That brings us up to HIJ. Shulchan Aruch is published in the 15th century. It then becomes the locus for further commentary, further debates. And so lots and lots of halachic scholarship gets written, commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch dealing with new cases, and details between the cases addressed by the Shulchan Aruch. And also responsive literature gets written throughout this period of time. Responsive literature are actual letters written by rabbis addressing questions that were asked. I have people send me emails and texts with all sorts of questions. They're mostly pretty simple, but sometimes they're kind of complicated, and maybe I'll write a longer answer and I'll have to consult with somebody or do some research. But and so if I were a significant scholar, I would be saving all those letters and eventually they'd be published. Okay, and we have volumes of right behind. Just the shelves behind you, actually, those are several volumes there. The red books, the shelf above you, the blue books to the left of them, the black books to the left of them. Those are collections of the entire shelf there. I'll show you. Okay. These are the collected Sheilot Tshuvot, the letters on halachic topics written by Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, who was a rabbi in Germany before the war and ended his career in Switzerland, died in the 1960s. This is the collected letters, halachic letters of the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Wolkenfeld, who lived in Israel and died relatively recently. And these are the collected letters of Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest halachic scholars ever to walk the shores of the United States, lived in New York, died in the 1980s. This is 3 volumes of letters of Rabbi Yehuda Herzl Henkin, who lives in Israel and is still alive, although he's been sick for a number of years, and others as well. Okay, so that continues, and that literature is vast and is continuing, and is a very important way that Jewish law is alive, right? And so every so often somebody will summarize the responsive literature and will summarize the commentaries on the codes, and will summarize essays that get published in Torah journals and periodicals, and will distill them into, not really new codes, but like a compendium on topics. That's like the big theme for the last 30, 40 years. A book about the laws of Shabbat, a book about the laws of Nida, a book about the laws of Kashrut, that will distill all of the vast and increasing scholarship in a more digested and processed form. That brings us to J. So that's the history of the Torah, the history of Halakha. Throughout this time period, we also had, again, Torah commentary per se on the Chumash, on Bible. That literature continues and has twists and turns and developments. But I think we'll pause here for now. Let's see if we can figure out the next class, and then, yeah, okay. Everyone's welcome to stay for Mincha if you wish, and if it's a lot of you, especially more than 2 or 3 women, we'll move into the big shul so everyone has space to stay, but please feel free to stay for our afternoon tefillah. The next time we're going to meet, let's see. Sorry, that was a little slow right now. Nope. I'm sorry guys, it's really hard. I have lots of... I think we can meet on Monday, June 4th, after Mincha. So it'll be a little bit late. It'll be around 8:15, 8:30, after Mincha Marav on Monday, June 4th. Okay? So let's say 8:30. It'll be 8:30, we'll go to 9:15. That'll be late enough. Okay.